Increasingly, America's foreign policy seems to be all about war and peace, with an emphasis on war. Even as Iran and the group of countries known as the P5+1 were negotiating a peaceful nuclear agreement, a senior US politician announced that he would prefer a nuclear standoff with Iran. It's a serious threat. America has launched and funded more wars and aggressive foreign policies than any other country in the world. Such statements by US politicians raise the temperature in the US and also in those countries under threat. Yet the time, cost, energy and tension across years of nuclear negotiations with Tehran have been caused by a mere handful of extremist US and Israeli politicians. Recently, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump even said he'd bomb the hell out of Iraq's oil fields to defeat ISIL. Observers also say that while the US and its allies claim they're fighting terror groups like ISIL, they helped create and train these very same organizations out of self-interest. WikiLeaks also reported the US National Security Agency spied on its own allies in France and Germany and on Germany's free press. This has led to a substantial loss of trust regarding the United States. So how do the American public feel when a presidential candidate says he would bomb the oil fields of Iraq? Is American foreign policy more about war or peace? And why has America fought more wars than any other nation on earth? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Now, even as Iran and the P5+1 group of countries were negotiating a peaceful nuclear agreement, US House of Representatives Speaker John Boehner said he would prefer a nuclear standoff with Iran. How does a statement like that make you feel? That's what we asked the American public.
Pretty concerned. It sounds pretty terrible. And with our country in the state of, what it's at right now. I mean, we've already gone to several wars already, you know what I mean? And I think we should just abstain from war in general.
I'm concerned about it. I think it's just pure opportunism on the part of the Republicans, to be quite honest.
I'm very concerned. I think when half of, the leader of the other half of the country seems to be sort of dedicated to subverting the foreign policy desires of the president, I think that's very damaging, and I think now that the deal is in place, having a further nuclear stand-up with Iran would sort of further alienate the countries and create a situation which would be more dangerous for American security interests. And frankly, John Boehner has made negative statements regarding the deal before learning any of the details, and seems to be political grandstanding on an issue of grave national security, and I think it's a shame.
Well, I'm not concerned. I think every country should have the right to develop their own nuclear weapons, and if we have our own nuclear weapons and we're saying, hey, you shouldn't have your own, then that tells everything you need to know, that we're about to attack them or something. We don't want them to be at equal. And I think if we're all for equality, I think all countries should be armed equally. That way no one will attack anyone.
I think that just sort of is US's way of doing things. We always just seem to jump to violence instead of wanting to talk things out. We feel like we have to be the police and be the strongest of them all, and yet all we're doing is creating more unrest throughout the world. I just think that statement's very common in the government right now.
That's what the public said. We asked our experts to consider how worried we should be when senior American politicians call for a nuclear standoff with Iran.
The Republican Party traditionally was a party which looked after the national interest, but it seems to me the Boehner statement indicates that they're no longer patriotic, because they really are speaking on behalf of the State of Israel, which is the major reason why this deal has been opposed. So it is quite sad that the Republicans, especially in the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be closer to the people, taking a view which is against American national interest, because US national interest should be in favor of a diplomatic deal, not of advocating a standoff, which really means the danger of a war.
I am very concerned when I see comments from from US politicians saying that they would prefer having a standoff with Iran. But to be honest, it's not surprising when you consider that many of them are hardcore ideologues who support Israel, and having a peaceful deal with Iran is counterproductive to their goals. So I am concerned, but it's not surprising.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has said he would be willing to bomb the hell out of Iraq's oil fields in order to defeat ISIL. Would you trust US foreign policy in his hands? That's the question we put to the people who could vote for him.
No, of course not. I mean, he has no political background. He has never been in a political position at all. Like, I would not trust him. I mean, I'm not even going to vote for him. Like, I don't trust him. I mean, I guess he's just going to have puppets that are going to be running everything. He's just going to be a puppet, so.
I would trust foreign policy in his hands, but you have to understand that when he says these things, he's trying to be, boisterous, or he's trying to attract people's attention, and also he's trying to set himself apart from real politicians that are just talking to talk and are these parasites on our money. And so he's someone that made his own money. I'm not saying that we're going to vote for him, but I'm saying that he does employ these devices when he's talking, so we shouldn't take that literally.
I would not. I absolutely would not. Donald Trump is as loose a cannon as they come, and I wouldn't trust him to watch my kids, let alone direct fighter pilots, in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, Middle East, Europe, you name it.
He's a joke. Maybe he went to Wharton Business School, but the guy is an idiot, and he's just about Donald Trump. It's all self-promotion, and it's hokum. It's sheer hokum.
Absolutely not. The guy is a joke, quite frankly. I suppose it's good if you're a Democrat because he's splitting the field. There's no way that guy could ever become president. It's laughable. And thanks for making it entertaining.
Absolutely not. I think anyone who is as outspoken as the way he is in such a very far out manner, and he's very dangerous. The way that he talks about just other races alone says a lot, and I don't think he would do anything with America's best interest in mind.
A presidential candidate's willingness to bomb the hell out of Iraq's oil fields sounds ominous. What can we really draw from this? We asked our experts.
Well, Trump is a demagogue. He's basically a rabble-rouser. And democracy tends to, one of the problems with democracy is exactly that it encourages demagoguery. Now, I'm almost wishing that Trump did become president because it would expose the ludicrousness of American foreign policy, really. However, I have to say that in another sense, he's also advocated keeping out of the Middle East, say it is not our war. So he's sending out contradictory messages, but quite clearly he comes across as a demagogue, he comes across as a rabble-rouser, and it is a matter of some concern for us all, for Americans as well, whether this guy is going to be good for American interests.
The United States have shown in the past, and even now with this rhetoric from Donald Trump, that they cannot be trusted when it comes to any meddling in the Middle East. So now the idea of trusting them at all in today's environment, where things are so much more heated and so much more unstable, with any responsible role would be irresponsible of me and of anyone. And the reality is that any involvement, any further actions that America takes will only exacerbate the problem.
WikiLeaks reported that the US National Security Agency has spied on the leaders and senior politicians of Germany and France for years. Can any ally trust the US? We asked the public.
Pretty much can't really trust them. I mean, if they're spying on us in general, I mean, Pretty much, no.
Well, the WikiLeaks doesn't really need to do a lot of work. I mean, we know that a bunch of other countries are spying on other countries. I mean, we have the microwire case about Israel spying on U.S. companies, and so this goes on back and forth. It's just that the media chooses to cover one person spying on another, but they don't cover the the countries that they don't like to talk about spying on us. So that's what it is.
I think allies can trust the U.S. I think that espionage has become one of the main ways in which countries now interact. Close allies spy on each other frequently. I think that the U.S. should halt all surveillance on foreign leaders immediately.
I don't think so, and I think that's shown in a lot of the polls that happen about like America in general. Think about how we are seen as in a global sort of sense. People hate us. There's no two ways about that. People don't like us, and it's clear because when our government is starting so many wars and spying on our friends, why would you like us?
It's an interesting one. I think that states have been spying on each other for a very long time. It's nothing entirely new. The invention of the internet didn't necessarily mean that the bulk collection of data led to any new types of infringement. Friendly nations have been spying on each other for a long time. So I think it's just the cost of doing business.
Not as far as spying on foreign governments. I think this is just sort of general policy, standard policy throughout the world. I don't think it's confined to the US.
Given the reliable reports of America's spying tactics against its own French and German allies, we asked our experts to assess what this tells us about Washington's integrity.
Well, spying on one's friends, what's new? It's quite well known, but the Yanks have been doing this for a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if Americans and Germans have been doing something similar. Espionage, spying is now a universal thing, and it's only the naive who get shocked about this. Angela Merkel said one should not spy on friends. I bet my boots the Germans also doing a bit of spying on the Americans and so on. It is power politics. It is the game everybody plays. And we should only be shocked about it when people say they're not doing it, in which case they're lying. But if they are actually fudging it, I'm not surprised at all that this takes place.
Reality is, when you look at the the story that came out about the NSA spying on different world leaders and politicians, the reality is most of these politicians and world leaders do not trust each other. It's a marriage of convenience. They have to talk together. They have certain ideologies they may agree on or certain worldviews. But the reality is there's very little trust. And what's happened is, for most people that are linked with or work with America, especially in the Middle East, there is I would say undoubtedly a big feeling of mistrust and underconfidence in what America does, just because every time America's moved in the region, it's created more issues.
The US has launched and funded more wars than any other country on earth. Why do you think that is? That's what we asked the public.
Well, I don't think that's an actually truthful statement. I don't believe it's... We have funded more.
That's all we do. We never have decided like, oh, let's talk this out. We just go to war. Like, that's all we know is to go to war rather than talk it out. Like in any other situation, other countries have talked it out and been like, oh yeah, that's a good solution. But we have just been like, oh, let's go to war. Let's go to war. Let's go to war. Let's go to war. In every other situation, like World War II, like we were like, we have missiles here. We want to try out our missiles. We want to try out our bombs. Like, we don't want to talk this out.
The United States is a corporation. It's a business. It needs to fund its interests. Guns for butter principle. I think that weapons are a good way of creating jobs. The military-industrial complex is very large. You only have to look at some of Eisenhower's last speeches as president to realize that there are forces at work that have an interest in warmongering.
Because they have more money.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Okay. Why? Because we're a huge, powerful country, and we, America wants to be preeminent in the world, and so it's in its interest, or so it thinks, to to start these wars and just go out there and, hegemony. That's what it's all about.
I think that the U.S. since World War II has sort of in some ways decided, in some ways passed the sort of mantelpiece that the British Empire was holding together, supporting sort of a quote-unquote free economic world order. And I think that order is in the eyes of American foreign policy experts needs to be defended with force, even if those sort of entanglements are not sort of directly in line with U.S. security interests. I think Vietnam is probably the best example. Iraq also certainly falls in that category. And I think it comes from a place of hubris and sort of misunderstanding of the world and America's responsibility in it.
Because we're never satisfied with what we have, even though we have so much space and, we can pretty much do whatever we want here. We want what's happening in the Middle East. We want, the rest of the world, basically.
Because of the imperialist thinking that came from the British Empire. I'm sorry that I'm talking to Brits, but that's where it comes from. And when we had the Gilded Age, there was an Enlightenment thing going on, and I think that's what we should go back to. We were not doing any wars. We had the 100 Years Peace after Napoleon, and if we didn't have all these banks trying to make money from wars, we wouldn't be in this situation.
It's a fact that Washington has started and bankrolled more wars than any other nation on earth. We wondered if our experts could clarify why this is the case.
Well, it is true, isn't it? During my own lifetime, I remember the Korean War, the Vietnam War, I remember the war on Grenada, I remember proxy wars, like, for example, in Nicaragua, in Chile, and so on. America considers itself a hegemonic state, which means that it claims really de facto supremacy over international politics. And war obviously is a means of pursuing some of its policies. Now, this is bad because, in fact, Obama sold the deal over Iran, saying diplomacy is better than war. It was an alternative. So they should actually try to live up to their own proclamation, to their own statements, and play down and stop pursuing war. This is going on all the time, and we have drones killing people. We have interventions in Libya more recently, and this is not the way to do international politics if we really wish for peace.
The United States, the more you look into its history as a nation, you see that it's been involved in far many more wars than any other nation in comparison. So and then it's not surprising to see that many Muslims and inhabitants of the Middle East do not trust any involvement by America in any affairs of the Middle East, just because they have shown that they aren't interested in the people's interests, in the people's safety and their future, but rather it's about securing their own country's certain interests, which center around oil and Israel.
Next, we invited the American public to consider whether they would describe US foreign policy as violent or peaceful. Here's what they said.
I think it's neither violent or peaceful. I think it's whatever fits. I don't think the predisposition is either way, really. I mean, maybe certain individuals in the government, maybe like Cheney, I think is, on the warmonger side. But I don't think that the government as a whole usually acts, in one direction or the other. Although I guess you could say it's hawkish. I would say it's hawkish.
Predominantly violent, unfortunately. That's not to say that the United States couldn't pull on economic levers to influence global policy. And I think that they've actually undermined their position in the world by using force. US exceptionalism hasn't worked. Working unilaterally hasn't worked. So entering into dialogue with countries like Iran is the best way for the United States to influence the world.
It is quite violent, really. They're pretty smart about it, the way they act, to make it seem like we're doing it for everyone else. We're trying to, help other people. We're trying to provide a safety and democracy to other countries when in reality we're just kind of fueling our own interests?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of both, because of the conditions, whatever they may be, and the president is really the only one in the know, and we people on the street, we just have to have confidence in our leaders, and I do have confidence in President Obama.
I'm not sure. I guess, okay, I'll describe it as violent due to sort of surveillance programs, drone strikes, the sort of posturing and military sort of focus of American foreign policy. But I would also say that the world is a very, is a violent place. We live on a planet that's sort of governed mainly by democracies in the West, but overall sort of dictated by general anarchy.
It's violent right now. It doesn't need to be if we had the right leader, even though I don't really think that the right leader will come, but if we had the right leader, they would realize that this country, I think, was built on capitalism and hard work, and whoever wanted to work for themselves, they were able to come here and just be by themselves and just do whatever they wanted. And right now, because we are out of money, we don't produce anything, we need to wage these wars so that we can make money and sustain the level of entitlement that the people here are used to now.
As violent because we just go to war. We don't know any other solution. So obviously it's violent and it's not peaceful, and obviously I wish it was a better way, but I don't know any other way.
We asked our experts if they regarded US foreign policy as being driven by violence or by a more peaceful outlook.
Well, the US foreign policy suffers from a contradiction, again, between its stated aims and its actual practice. If they want to rely on the United Nations, they want to rely on international law, then they have to abide by their own words. If they swear up and down that we repudiate war, then why do they engage in military adventures like the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, the bombing of Libya, all episodes which have sparked off appalling consequences? And now, but there is a glimmer of light. For example, it's good that this deal over Iran has been made. And as Obama says, and I'm not starry-eyed about Obama, I think he's got his dark side, but at the same time, it's good when in this case, diplomacy has taken precedence over war. But I am not optimistic about the future, especially when it comes to the state of Israel. And Netanyahu has declared he's not bound by this agreement, and he's still threatening, saber-rattling and threatening war. It seems, Netanyahu is the mad dog of the Middle East. He is the guy we got to watch out. And because of his influence on American foreign policy, we got to be on our guard.
Well, the thing is, there have been, conservative estimates that, that are for every one American killed, about 30 Muslims have been killed. So I do consider the American foreign policy to be extremely violent and has committed many atrocities. And it's for that reason, and because of that perception that people have of it, which is backed by reality, that many people do not trust American foreign policy and any comments that American politicians make or any movements that the American army makes within the Middle East, just because it has led to many more issues, more instability and more violence.
The US has launched more wars than any other country in the world. They've got a Republican presidential candidate who would be willing to bomb the hell out of the oil fields of Iraq to defeat ISIL. And they have a House of Representatives speaker who would prefer a nuclear standoff with Iran. With all this going on, perhaps it's time for other, less reactionary countries to work together and reduce US involvement in international disputes before Washington causes a war at the very time when others are working for peace.